There's a problem in miniature painting that oftentimes become the factors that can make or break a paint job. I'm of course talking about
the details.
All of the tiny bits and pieces that you have to get through before you can call the model finished. And I think that the amount of details in Warhammer scale miniatures has a huge effect on how we paint. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly how I tend to deal with the detailed sculpts and how you easily can do the same. But before we get started, I want to let you know that this video is a continuation of a previous video I've done called How to Sketch and Blend. This is the beginning of a series of videos that I would like to make on the fundamentals of miniature painting and all of the essential skills that I wish that I had learned sooner. So consider that video episode 1 and this video episode 2. And of course, if you don't want to miss any of these in the future, be sure to go ahead and subscribe to the channel and click that bell notification icon. Or you can even consider supporting me on Patreon for extended edits of each of these. Now, for those of you who haven't seen episode 1 yet, I highly advise that you go back and watch it. And if you have seen it, you'll know that the basic premise of that video is that we as miniature painters can learn a lot from 2D artists. And more particularly, we can learn a lot from drawing, since drawing is the foundation of painting in 2D. This is because learning how to draw teaches us how light and volumes interact, and that's regardless of whether this form is in 2D or in 3D. And in that previous video, I also showed how to sketch and blend on a Space Marine. And that's all well and good, but it's time to take things up a notch. You see, here's just the thing. A Space Marine is a really simple figure. It's mostly just armor that has the same color and finish all over the model. And so the sketching and blending techniques that we used in that video worked very well for that figure. But what happens when we have something that has a lot more detail and really is much more complicated both in terms of lighting and in terms of different materials? How do we apply the approach of sketching the general light and painting the whole figure instead of painting element by element when we have a miniature that's very detailed and very complex? That's the question that I'll be answering in this video. Because in my experience, it's oftentimes the details that kills the paint job. And nowhere is this more prevalent than with Warhammer figures. And that's because these miniatures are made to work well with GW's own product. Washes, contrast paints, etc. But that's another rant for a different video. I've picked up this super complicated sculpt from the Cursed City box with multiple characters and even a bit of OSL from this candle. And there's just so many details. My idea for this guy is that he's rummaging around looking for something in the dark. So the overall atmosphere should be dark and cool, whereas the candlelight should be warm. And with all the details on this model and this kind of complicated scheme, it's very easy to get lost. So before we begin, let me explain how I intend to make this paint job work. And just like we did in the last episode, we're going to go from the general to the more specific, from the bigger shapes to the smaller shapes. This side of the miniature will be hit with a mixture of white ink and ice yellow through the airbrush. That means that all the planes that are facing towards this candle are going to have some brightness. The rest of the miniature we can hit with a cooler gray. This is going to be my ambient light. I'll then know exactly where to place the lights on each individual element. And if it looks good, I can come in with some orange ink to color the lighting of the OSL. The best part about this airbrushing technique is that it takes very little time. And now that I have a general scheme and a general light placement that I like, I can start to refine the results with the brush. And here we especially have to start working and thinking about the midzones. And because we have this airbrush sketch that is so solid, we can work with thinner layers and work more with glazes. I start by glazing some violet ink from AK into the recesses of the model. This creates a form of dark lining from the very beginning and helps to separate different materials from one another. I like using this ink because it's transparent and flows very nicely into the recesses of the figure. It also fits into the New Month, New Medium event that's going on over on my community server on Discord for my patrons, where we're challenging each other to try new mediums and share our findings with one another. And honestly, for me, inks are a pretty uncharted territory. If you're interested in joining the Patreon and getting access to tons of exclusive content and participating in events such as the one I've just described, you can go ahead and check that out through the link down in the description. This is your chance to be part of one of the most awesome online communities in the world. Seriously, I cannot thank my patrons enough. Thank you so much, you guys, and let's get back to the painting. And already with this step, I think that the miniature looks much better as we're starting to have more separation between elements and more chroma. We can also use the same violet ink as a glaze and cover some of the darker midtones and pull it into the shadows. I then set up the palette with a few different colors: black, magenta, wine red, medium orange, pale gray, ice yellow, royal brown, and samurai green. The most important colors are the violet ink and the medium orange. This means that we'll have what is called a split complementary scheme. So I could add some additions of warm green as well if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that for this painting. I'll stick to using the samurai green very sparingly. And the samurai green will mostly be visible from the back, where it's going to be much more desaturated than the violet and the orange that we have in the front. If you want to learn more about color theory and different color schemes, don't worry, I have a video about that coming out very soon as well. I'll then start to glaze some royal brown into the cloak. This is going to be the midtones of the cloak, which I imagine being a brownish red. Glazing with this color works very well because the color in itself is transparent, so it doesn't really cover completely neither the shadows nor the highlight, but it just helps to pull this material together and make it more coherent. Once I add some medium orange to the royal brown, it gains much more opacity. I'll then start to paint some layers with a textured brush stroke to build some brightness. A touch of ice yellow into the mix, and we then have a nice bright tone that we can use both for the brightest highlights on the cloak as well as on the skin. Again, I'm thinking about the warmth of that candlelight and how everything that it touches should be some shade of orange. I then move on to painting the non-metallic metal keys. Here I'm using more of the pale gray and adding in small touches of ice yellow to brighten. In the end, I'll glaze a little bit of the medium orange to warm up these non-metallic metal keys, and some violet ink can again help to create that separation and dark lining between the individual elements. For the hood, I would like to have a more saturated local color. So I'll come in with some magenta and some red tones and try to build up this golden highlight color. Because the hood is so close to the face, I can use these more saturated tones to pull some attention towards the face. A particular technique that I always think about when painting in this way is how the brush stroke leaves the most paint at the end of the stroke. So in this way, I'll guide the brightest points to where I want them and end my stroke there. And painting in this way helps me to create both better looking and more efficient layers. Let's take a look at that clip again, just so I'm sure you can see what I'm talking about. As I add more of the orange and the ice yellow into the mix, I get this very nice golden highlight color. And I place a particular emphasis on the edges of the material. For the back of the cloak, I really enjoy making these longer, bigger brush strokes, especially after painting all of these tiny details in the front. I've mixed the royal brown and a tiny bit of samurai green and pale gray in order to create this dark, cool brown color. Again, I focus the light towards the top of the figure and paint in these lines that run down the length of the cloak. As I brighten the mix, I'm adding in more and more of the pale gray. This is more of a loose sketching approach that I'm more used to painting with, and so it's different from the glazing techniques that we've been using in the front of the miniature. This way of painting is probably more similar to what you've used to see me do in the previous video. So I hope that this video has given you some insights into how to handle details in miniature painting. And to sum up my approach, transparent inks and glazes can be used to refine an existing airbrush sketch. And with such detailed models such as the one you're seeing here, it's really important to choose which details to neglect and which details to emphasize. And you can use brightness and saturation to guide your viewer to the focal points of the mini. If you like this video and would like to see more, go ahead and check out the Patreon link down in the description, where you'll find exclusive content and updates, as well as the opportunity for private coaching, feedback, and much more. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and here is the finished miniature.